Chapter 19. As long as they were Commodores, Clayton of North America and Schweikert of Europe had stayed fairly close to the home planet, except for infrequent vacation trips. With the formation of the Galactic Patrol, however, and their becoming Admiral and Lieutenant Admiral of the First Galactic Region, and their acquisition of lenses, the radius of their sphere of action was tremendously increased. One or the other of them was always to be found in Grand Fleet headquarters at New York Spaceport, but only very seldom were both of them there at once. And if the absentee were not to be found on Earth, what of it? The First Galactic Region included all of the solar systems and all of the planets adherent to civilization, and the absentee could, as a matter of business and duty, be practically anywhere. Usually, however, he was not upon any of the generally known planets, but upon Bennett, getting acquainted with the officers, supervising the drilling of Grand Fleet in new maneuvers, teaching classes in advanced strategy, and holding skull practice generally. It was hard work, and not too inspiring, but in the end it paid off big. They knew their men knew them. They could work together with a snap, a smoothness, a precision otherwise impossible. For imported top brass, unknown to and unacquainted with the body of command, cannot have and does not expect the deep regard and the earned respect so necessary to high morale. Clayton and Schweikert had both. They started early enough, worked hard enough, and had enough stuff to earn both. Thus it came about that, when upon a scheduled day the two admirals came to Bennett together, they were greeted as enthusiastically as though they had been Bennettons born and bred, and their welcome became a planet-wide celebration when Clayton issued the orders which all Bennett had been waiting so long and so impatiently to hear. Bennettons were at last to leave Bennett. Group after group, subfleet after subfleet, the component units of the Galactic Patrol's Grand Fleet took off. They assembled in space. They maneuvered enough to shake themselves down into some semblance of unity. They practiced the new maneuvers. They blasted off in formation for Sol. And as the tremendous armada neared the solar system, it met, or rather was joined by, the patrol ships about which Morgan and his minions already knew, each of which fitted itself into its long-assigned place. Every planet of civilization had sent its every vessel capable of putting out a screen or of throwing a beam, but so immense was the number of warships in Grand Fleet that this increment, great as it intrinsically was, made no perceptible difference in its size. On Rally Day, Grand Fleet lay poised near Earth. As soon as he had introduced Samms to the intensely interested listeners at the rally, Roderick Kinnison disappeared. Actually, he drove a bug to a distant corner of the spaceport and left the Earth in a light cruiser, but to all intents and purposes, so engrossed was everyone in what Samms was saying, Kinnison simply vanished. Samms was already in the Boise. The port admiral went out to his old flagship, the Chicago. Nor, in case any observer of the enemy should be trying to keep track of him, could his course be traced. Cleveland and Northrop and Rularion and all they needed of the vast resources of the patrol saw to that. Neither Samms nor Kinnison had any business being with Grand Fleet in person, of course, and both knew it. But everyone knew why they were there, and were glad that the two top lensmen had decided to live or die with their fleet. If Grand Fleet won, they would probably live. If Grand Fleet lost, they would certainly die. If not in the pyrotechnic dissolution of their ships, then in a matter of days upon the ground. With the fleet, their presence would contribute markedly to morale. It was a chance very much worth taking. Nor were Clayton and Schweikert together, or even near each other. Samms, Kinnison, and the other two admirals were as far away from each other as they could get and still remain in Grand Fleet's fighting cylinder. Cylinder? Yes. The patrol's board of strategy, assuming that the enemy would attack in conventional cone formation, and knowing that one cone could defeat another only after a long and costly engagement, had long since spent months and months at war games in their tactical tanks, in search of a better formation. They had found it. Theoretically, a cylinder of proper composition could defeat, with negligible loss and in a very short time, the best cones they were able to devise. The drawback was that the ships composing a theoretically efficient cylinder would have to be highly specialized and vastly greater in number than any one power had ever been able to put into the ether. However, with all the resources of Bennett devoted to construction, this difficulty would not be insuperable. This, of course, brought up the question of what would happen if cylinder met cylinder, if the black strategists should also have arrived at the same solution, and this question remained unanswered. Or rather, there were too many answers, no two of which agreed, like those to the classical one of what would happen if an irresistible force should strike an immovable object. There would be a lot of intensely interesting byproducts. Even Rularion of Jove did not come up with a definite solution, nor did Bergenholm, who, although a comparatively obscure young Lensman scientist and not a member of the Galactic Council, was frequently called into consultation because of his unique ability to arrive at correct conclusions via some obscurely short-circuiting process of thought. "Well," Port Admiral Kinnison had concluded finally, "if they've got one too, we'll just have to shorten ours up, widen it out, and pray." "Clayton to Port Admiral Kinnison," came a communication through channels. "Have you any additional orders or instructions?" "Kinnison to Admiral Clayton. None," the Port Admiral replied as formally, then went on via lens. "No comment or criticism to make, Alex. You fellows have done a job so far, and you'll keep on doing one. How much detection have you got out?" 12 detets, 3 globes of diesels. If we sit here and do nothing, the boys will get edgy and go stale, so if you and Virg agree, we'll give 'em some practice. Lord knows they need it, and it'll keep them on their toes. But about the blacks, they may be figuring on delaying any action until we've had time to crack from boredom. What's your idea on that?" "I've been worrying about the same thing. Practice will help, but whether enough or not, I don't know. What do you think, Virg? Will they hold it up deliberately or strike fast?" "Fast," the First Lensman replied, promptly and definitely. "As soon as they possibly can, for several reasons. They don't know our real strength any more than we know theirs. They undoubtedly believe, however, the same as we do, that they are more efficient than we are and have the larger force. By their own need of practice, they will know ours. They do not attach nearly as much importance to morale as we do. By the very nature of their regime, they can't. Also, our open challenge will tend very definitely to force their hands, since face-saving is even more important to them than it is to us. They will strike as soon as they can and as hard as they can." Grand Fleet maneuvers were begun, but in a day or so the alarms came blasting in. The enemy had been detected, coming in, as the previous Black Fleet had come, from the direction of Coma Berenices. Calculating machines clicked and whirred, orders were flashed, and a brief string of numbers, ships by the hundred and the thousands, flashed into their assigned positions. Or, more precisely, almost into them. Most of the navigators and pilots had not had enough practice yet to hit their assigned positions exactly on the first try, since a radical change in axial direction was involved, but they did pretty well. A few minutes of juggling and jockeying were enough. Clayton and Schweikert used a little caustic language, via lens and to their fellow lensmen only, of course, but Samms and Kinnison were well enough pleased. The time of formation had been very satisfactorily short, and the cone was smooth, symmetrical, and of beautifully uniform density. The preliminary formation was a cone, not a cylinder. It was not a conventional cone of battle, and that it was not of standard composition, was too big, and had altogether too many ships for its size. It was, however, of the conventional shape, and it was believed that by the time the enemy could perceive any significant differences, it would be too late for him to do anything about it. The cylinder would be forming about that time anyway, and it was almost believed, at least it was strongly hoped, that the enemy would not have the time or the knowledge or the equipment to do anything about that either. Kinnison grinned to himself as his mind, en rapport with Clayton's, watched the enemy's cone of battle enlarge upon the Admiral's conning plate. It was big and powerful. The Galactic Patrol's publicly known forces would have stood exactly the chance of the proverbial snowball in the nether regions. It was not, however, the Port Admiral thought, big enough to form an efficient cylinder, or to handle the patrol's real force in any fashion, and unless they shifted within the next second or two, it would be too late for the enemy to do anything at all. As though by magic, about 95% of the patrol's tremendous cone changed into a tightly packed double cylinder. This maneuver was much simpler than the previous one, and had been practiced to perfection. The mouth of the cone closed in and lengthened. The closed end opened out and shortened. Tractors and pressers leapt from ship to ship, binding the whole myriad of hitherto discrete units into a single structure as solid, even comparatively as to size, as a cantilever bridge. And instead of remaining quiescent, waiting to be attacked, the cylinder flashed forward, inertialess at maximum blast. Throughout the years the violence, intensity, and sheer brute power of offensive weapons had increased steadily. Defensive armament had kept step. One fundamental fact, however, had not changed throughout the ages, and has not changed yet. 3 or more units of given power have always been able to conquer 1 unit of the same power, if engagement could be forced and no assistance could be given, and 2 units could practically always do so. Fundamentally, therefore, strategy always has been, and still is, the development of new artifices and techniques by virtue of which 2 or more of our units may attack 1 of theirs, the while affording the minimum of opportunity for them to retaliate in kind. The patrol's grand fleet flashed forward, almost exactly along the axis of the black cone, right where the enemy wanted it, or so he thought. Straight into the yawning mouth, erupting now a blast of flame beside which the wildest imaginings of inferno must pale into insignificance, straight along that raging axis toward the apex, at the terrific speed of the 2 directly opposed velocities of flight. But to the complete consternation of the Black High Command, nothing much happened. For, as has been pointed out, that cylinder was not of even approximately normal composition. In fact, there was not a normal war vessel in it. The outer skin and both ends of the cylinder were purely defensive. Those vessels, packed so closely that their repeller fields actually touched, were all screened. None of them had a beam hot enough to light a match. Conversely, the inner layer, or liner, was composed of vessels that were practically all offense. They had to be protected at every point, but how they could ladle it out. The leading and trailing edges of the formation, the ends of the gigantic pipe, so to speak, would of course bear the brunt of the black attack, and it was this factor that had given the patrol strategists the most serious concern. Wherefore, the first 10 and the last 6 double rings of ships were special indeed. They were all screen, nothing else. They were drones, operated by remote control, carrying no living thing. If the patrol losses could be held to 8 double rings of ships at the first pass and 4 at the second, theoretical computations indicated losses of 6 and 2, Samms and his fellows would be well content. All of the patrol ships had, of course, the standard equipment of so-called violet, green, and red fields, as well as duodecaplylatomate and ordinary atomic bombs, dirigible torpedoes and transporters, slicers, polycyclic drills, and so on. But in this battle, the principal reliance was to be placed upon the sheer, brutal, overwhelming power of what had been called the macro beam, now simply the beam. Furthermore, in the incredibly incandescent frenzy of the chosen field of action, the cylinder was to attack the cone at its very strongest part. No conceivable material projectile could have lasted a single microsecond after leaving the screens of force of its parent vessel. It could have flown fast enough. Ultra-beam trackers could have steered it rapidly enough and accurately enough. But before it could have traveled a foot, even at ultralight speed, it would have ceased utterly to be. It would have been resolved into its subatomic constituent particles and waves. Nothing material could exist, except instantaneously, in the field of force filling the axis of the Black's cone of battle, a field beside which the exact center of a multi-billion-volt flash of lightning would constitute a dead area. That field, however, encountered no material object. The patrol's screeners, packed so closely as to have a 400% overlap, had been designed to withstand precisely that inconceivable environment. Practically all of them withstood it, and in a fraction of a second the hollow forward end of the cylinder engulfed, pipe-wise, the entire apex of the enemy's war cone, and the hitherto idle sluggers of the cylinder's liner went to work. Each of those vessels had one heavy pressure beam, each having the same push as every other, directed inward toward the cylinder's axis, and backward at an angle of 15 degrees from the perpendicular line between ship and axis. Therefore, wherever any black ship entered the patrol cylinder, or however, it was driven to and held at the axis and forced backward along that axis. None of them, however, got very far. They were perforce in single file, one ship opposing at least one solid ring of giant sluggers who did not have to concern themselves with defense, but could pour every iota of their tremendous resources into offensive beams. Thus the odds were not merely 2 or 3 to 1, but never less than 80, and very frequently over 200 to 1. Under the impact of those unimaginable torrents of force, the screens of the engulfed vessels flashed once, practically instantaneously through the spectrum, and went down. Whether they had 2 or 3 or 4 courses made no difference. In fact, even the ultra-speed analyzers of the observers could not tell. Then, a couple of microseconds later, the wall shields, the strongest fabrics of force developed by man up to that time, also failed. Then those ravenous fields of force struck bare, unprotected metal, and every molecule, inorganic and organic, of ships and contents alike, disappeared in a bursting flare of energy so raw and so violent as to stagger even those who had brought it into existence. It was certainly vastly more than a mere volatilization. It was deduced later that the detonating unstoppable isotopes of the Black's own bombs, in the frightful temperatures already existing in the patrol's quasi-solid beams, had initiated a chain reaction which had resulted in the fissioning of a considerable proportion of the atomic nuclei of usually completely stable elements. The cylinder stopped. The lensman took stock. The depth of erosion of the leading edge had averaged almost exactly 6 double rings of drones. In places, the 6th ring was still intact. In others, which had encountered unusually concentrated beaming, the 7th was gone. Also, a fraction of 1% of the manned war vessels had disappeared. Brief though the time of engagement had been, the enemy had been able to concentrate enough beams to burn a few holes through the walls of the attacking cylinder. It had not been hoped that more than a few hundreds of black vessels could be blown out of the ether at this first pass. General Staff had been sure, however, that the heaviest and most dangerous ships, including those carrying the enemy's high command, would be among them. The midsection of the apex of the conventional cone of battle had always been the safest place to be. Therefore, that was where the black admirals had been, and therefore they no longer lived. In a few seconds it became clear that if any black high command existed, it was not in shape to function efficiently. Some of the enemy's ships were still blasting, with little or no concerted effort, at the regulation cone which the cylinder had left behind. A few were attempting to get into some kind of a formation, possibly to attack the patrol cylinder. Indecision was visible and rampant. To turn that tremendous cylindrical engine of destruction around would have been a task of hours, but it was not necessary. Instead, each vessel cut its tractors and pressers, spun end for end, reconnected, and retraced almost exactly its previous course, cutting out and blasting into nothingness another plug of black warships. Another reversal, another dash. And this time, so disorganized were the foes and so feeble the beaming, not a single patrol vessel was lost. The Black Fleet, so proud and so conquering of mien a few minutes before, had fallen completely apart. That's enough, Rod, don't you think? Samms thought then. Please order Clayton to cease action, so that we can hold a parley with their senior officers. Parley, hell! Kinnison's answering thought was a snarl. We've got 'em going! Mop 'em up before they can pull themselves together! Parley be damned! Beyond a certain point, military action becomes indefensible butchery, of which our Galactic Patrol will never be guilty. That point has now been reached. If you do not agree with me, I'll be glad to call a council meeting to decide which of us is right. That isn't necessary. You're right. That's one reason I'm not First Lensman. The Port Admiral, fury and fire ebbing from his mind, issued orders. The patrol forces hung motionless in space. As President of the Galactic Council, Virg, take over. Spy rays probed and searched. A communicator beam was sent. Virgil Samms spoke aloud, in the lingua franca of deep space. Connect me, please, with the senior officer of your fleet. There appeared upon Sam's plate a strong, not unhandsome face, deep stamped with the bitter hopelessness of a strong man facing certain death. You've got us. Come on and finish us. Some such indoctrination was to be expected, but I anticipate no trouble in convincing you that you have been grossly misinformed in everything you have been told concerning us, our aims, our ethics, our morals, and our standards of conduct. There are, I assume, other surviving officers of your rank, although of lesser seniority? There are 10 other vice-admirals, but I am in command. They will obey my orders or die. Nevertheless, they shall be heard. Please go inert, match our intrinsic velocity, and come aboard, all 11 of you. We wish to explore with all of you the possibilities of a lasting peace between our worlds. Peace? Bah! Why lie? The Black Commander's expression did not change. I know what you are, and what you do to conquered races. We prefer a clean, quick death in your beams to the kind you deal out in your torture rooms and experimental laboratories. Come ahead. I intend to attack you as soon as I can make a formation. I repeat, you have been grossly, terribly, shockingly misinformed. Sam's voice was quiet and steady. His eyes held those of the other. We are civilized men, not barbarians or savages. Does not the fact that we ceased hostility so soon mean anything to you? For the first time, the stranger's face changed subtly, and Sam's pressed the slight advantage. I see it does. Now, if you will converse with me mind to mind. The First Lensman felt for the man's ego and began to tune to it, but this was too much. I will not. The Black put up a solid block. I will have nothing to do with your cursed lens. I know what it is, and will have none of it. Oh, what's the use, Virg? Kinnison snapped. Let's get on with it. A great deal of use, Rod, Samms replied quietly. This is a turning point. I must be right. I can't be that far wrong. And he again turned his attention to the enemy commander. Very well, sir. We will continue to use spoken language. I repeat, please come aboard with your 10 fellow vice-admirals. You will not be asked to surrender. You will retain your sidearms, as long as you make no attempt to use them. Whether or not we come to any agreement, you will be allowed to return unharmed to your vessels before the battle is resumed. What? Sidearms? Returned? You swear it? As President of the Galactic Council, in the presence of the highest officers of the Galactic Patrol as witnesses, I swear it. We will come aboard. Very well. I will have 10 other lensmen and officers here with me. The Boise, of course, inerted first, followed by the Chicago and 9 of the tremendous teardrops from Bennett. Port Admiral Kinnison and 9 other lensmen joined Samms in the Boise's con room. The tight formation of 11 patrol ships blasted in unison in the space courtesy of meeting the equally tight formation of black warships halfway in the matter of intrinsic velocity. Soon the 2 little subfleets were motionless in respect to each other. 11 black gigs were launched. 11 black vice-admirals came aboard, to the accompaniment of the full military honors customarily granted to visiting admirals of friendly powers. Each was armed with what seemed to be an exact duplicate of the patrol's own current blaster, Lewiston Mark 17. In the lead strode the tall, heavy, gray-haired man with whom Samms had been dealing, still defiant, still sullen, still concealing sternly his sheer desperation. His block was still on, full strength. The man next in line was much younger than the leader, much less wrought up, much more intent. Samms felt for this man's ego, tuned to it, and got the shock of his life. The black vice admiral's mind was not at all what he had expected to encounter. It was, in every respect, of Lensman grade. "Oh, how? You were not speaking, and... I see. The lens! The lens!" The stranger's mind was for seconds an utterly indescribable turmoil in which relief, gladness, and high anticipation struggled for supremacy. In the next few seconds, even before the visitors had reached their places at the conference table, Virgil Samms and Corander of Petrine exchanged thoughts which would require many thousands of words to express, only a few of which are necessary here. The lens! I have dreamed of such a thing without hope of realization or possibility. How we have been misled! They are, then, actually available upon your world, Samms of Tellus? Not exactly, and not at all generally, and Samms explained as he had explained so many times before. You will wear one sooner than you think. But as to ending this warfare, you survivors are practically all natives of your own world. Petrine? Not practically. We are Petrinos all. The teachers were all in the center. Many remain upon Petrine and its neighboring worlds, but none remain alive here. Olancer, then, who assumed command, is also a Petrino? So hard-headed, I had assumed otherwise. He will be a stumbling block. Is he actually in supreme command? Only by and with our consent under such astounding circumstances as these. He is a reactionary of the old, die-hard, war dog school. He would ordinarily be in supreme command and would be supported by the teachers, if any were here. But I will challenge his authority and theirs, standing upon my right to command my own fleet as I see fit. So will, I think, several others. So go ahead with your meeting. Be seated, gentlemen. All saluted punctiliously and sat down. Now, Vice Admiral Olancer, how do you, a stranger, know my name? I know many things. We have a suggestion to offer, which, if you Petrinos will follow it, will end this warfare. First, please believe that we have no designs upon your planet, nor any quarrel with any of its people who are not hopelessly contaminated by the ideas and the culture of the entities who are back of this whole movement, quite possibly those whom you refer to as the teachers. You did not know whom you were to fight or why. This was a statement with no hint of question about it. I see now that we did not know all the truth, Olancer admitted stiffly. We were informed and given proof sufficient to make us believe that you were monsters from outer space, rapacious, insatiable, senselessly and callously destructive to all other forms of intelligent life. We suspected something of the kind. Do you others agree, Vice Admiral Corander? Yes, we were shown detailed and documented proofs, stereos of battles, in which no quarter was given. We saw system after system conquered, world after world laid waste. We were made to believe that our only hope of continued existence was to meet you and destroy you in space. For if you were allowed to reach Petrine, every man, woman, and child on the planet would either be killed outright or tortured to death. I see now that those proofs were entirely false, completely vicious. They were. Those who spread that lying propaganda and all who support their organization must be and shall be weeded out. Petrine must be and shall be given her rightful place in the Galactic Fellowship of free, independent, and cooperative worlds. So must any and all planets whose peoples wish to adhere to civilization, instead of to tyranny and despotism. To further these ends, we Lensmen suggest that you reform your fleet and proceed to Arisia. Arisia? Olanzer did not like the idea. Arisia, Samms insisted. Upon leaving Arisia, knowing vastly more than you do now, you will return to your home planet, where you will take whatever steps you will then know to be necessary. We were told that your lenses are hypnotic devices, Olanzer sneered, designed to steal away and destroy the minds of any who listen to you. I believe that fully. I will not go to Arisia, nor will any part of Patrine's Grand Fleet. I will not attack my home planet. I will not do battle against my own people. This is final. I am not saying or implying that you should, but you continue to close your mind to reason. How about you, Vice Admiral Corander, and you others? In the momentary silence, Samms put himself en rapport with the other officers, and was overjoyed at what he learned. I do not agree with Vice Admiral Olanzer, Corander said flatly. He commands, not Grand Fleet, but his subfleet merely, as do we all. I will lead my subfleet to Arisia. Traitor! Olanzer shouted. He leapt to his feet and drew his blaster, but a tractor beam snatched it from his grasp before he could fire. You were allowed to wear sidearms, not to use them, Sam said quietly. How many of you others agree with Corander, and how many with Olanzer? All 9 voted with the younger man. Very well. Olanzer, you may either accept Corander's leadership, or leave this meeting now and take your subfleet directly back to Patrine. Decide now which you prefer to do. You mean you aren't going to kill me even now, or even degrade me, or put me under arrest? I mean exactly that. What is your decision? In that case, I must have been, wrong. I will follow Corander. A wise choice. Corander, you already know what to expect, except that 4 or 5 other Patrinos now in this room will help you, not only in deciding what must be done upon Patrine, but also in the doing of it. This meeting will adjourn. But no reprisals? Corander, in spite of his newly acquired knowledge, was dubious, almost dumbfounded. No invasion or occupation? No indemnities to your patrol or reparations? No punishment of us, our men, or our families? None. That does not square up even with ordinary military usage. I know it. It does conform, however, to the policy of the Galactic Patrol, which is to spread throughout our island universe. You are not even sending your fleet, or heavy units of it, with us to see to it that we follow your instructions? It is not necessary. If you need any form of help, you will inform us of your requirements via Lens, as I am conversing with you now, and whatever you want will be supplied. However, I do not expect any such call. You and your fellows are capable of handling the situation. You will soon know the truth, and know that you know it. And when your house cleaning is done, we will consider your application for representation upon the Galactic Council. Goodbye. Thus the Lensman, particularly First Lensman Virgil Samms, brought another sector of the galaxy under the aegis of civilization. Chapter 20. After the rally, there were a few days during which neither Samms nor Kinnison was on Earth. That the Cosmocrats' presidential candidate and the First Lensman were both with the fleet was not a secret. In fact, it was advertised. Everyone was told why they were out there, and almost everyone approved. Nor was their absence felt. Developments, fast and terrific, were slammed home. Cosmocratic spellbinders in every state of North America waved the flag, pointed with pride and viewed with alarm, in the very best tradition of North American politics. But, above all, there appeared upon every newsstand and in every bookshop of the continent, at the open time of the day following Rally Day, a book of over 1,800 pages of fine print. A book the publication of which had given Samms himself no little concern. "But I'm afraid of it," he had protested. "We know it's true, but there's material on almost every page for the biggest libel and slander suits in history." "I know it," the bald and paunchy Lensman attorney had replied. "Fully. I hope they do take action against us, but I'm absolutely certain they won't." "You hope they do?" "Yes. If they take the initiative, they can't prevent us from presenting our evidence in full, and there is no court in existence, however corrupt, before which we could not win. What they want and must have is delay, avoidance of any issue until after the election." "I see." Samms was convinced. The location of the patrol's grand fleet had been concealed from all inhabitants of the Solarian system, friends and foes alike. But the climactic battle, liberating as it did energy sufficient to distort the very warp and woof of the fabric of space itself, could not be hidden or denied, or even belittled. It was not, however, advertised or blazoned abroad. Then as now, the newshawks wanted to know, instantly and via long-range communicators, vastly more than those responsible for security cared to tell. Then, as now, the latter said as little as it was humanly possible to say. Everyone knew that the patrol had won a magnificent victory, but nobody knew who or what the enemy had been. Since the rank and file knew it, everyone knew that only a fraction of the Black Fleet had actually been destroyed, but nobody knew where the remaining vessels went or what they did. Everyone knew that about 95% of the patrol's astonishingly huge Grand Fleet had come from and was on its way back to the planet Bennett, and knew, since Bennettons would in a few weeks be scampering gaily all over space, in general what Bennett was, but nobody knew why it was. Thus, when the North American contingent landed at New York Spaceport, everyone whom the newsmen could reach was literally mobbed. However, in accordance with the aphorism ascribed to the wise old owl, those who knew the least said the most. But the telenews ace who had once interviewed both Kinnison and Samms wasted no time upon small fry. He insisted on seeing the top two lensmen, and kept on insisting until he did see them. "Nothing to say," Kinnison said curtly, leaving no doubt whatever that he meant it. "All talking, if any, will be done by First Lensman Samms." "Now, all you millions of telenews listeners, I am interviewing First Lensman Samms himself. A little closer to the mic, please, First Lensman. Now, sir, what everybody wants to know is, who are the Blacks?" "I don't know." "You don't know? On the lens, sir?" "On the lens. I still don't know." "I see. But you have suspicions or ideas? You can guess?" "I can guess, but that's all it would be, a guess." "And my guess, folks, is that his guess would be a very highly informed guess. Will you tell the public, First Lensman Samms, what your guess is?" "I will." If this reply astonished the newshawk, it staggered Kinnison and the others who knew Samms best. It was, however, a coldly calculated political move. "While it will probably be several weeks before we can furnish detailed and unassailable proof, it is my considered opinion that the Black Fleet was built and controlled by the Morgantown-Isaacson machine. That they, all unknown to any of us, enticed, corrupted, and seduced a world, or several worlds, to their program of domination and enslavement. That they intended by armed force to take over the continent of North America, and through it the whole Earth and all the other planets adherent to civilization. That they intended to hunt down and kill every lensman, and to subvert the Galactic Council to their own ends. This is what you wanted?" "That's fine, sir. Just what we wanted. But just one more thing, sir." The newsman had obtained infinitely more than he had expected to get, yet, good newsman-like, he wanted more. "Just a word, if you will, Mr. Samms, as to these trials and the White Book." "I can add very little, I'm afraid, to what I have already said, and what is in the Black Book, and that little can be classed as 'I told you so.' We are trying, and will continue to try, to force those criminals to trial. To break up, to prohibit an unending series of hair-splitting delays. We want, and are determined to get, legal action. to make each of those we have accused defend himself in court and under oath. Morgan and his crew, however, are working desperately to avoid any action at all, because they know that we can and will prove every allegation we have made." The Telenews ace signed off. Samms and Kinnison went to their respective offices, and cosmocratic orators throughout the nation had a field day. They glowed and scintillated with triumph. They yelled themselves hoarse, leather-lunged tomb-thumpers though they were, in pointing out the unsullied purity, the spotless perfection of their own party and its every candidate for office, in shuddering revulsion at the never-to-be-sufficiently condemned, proved and demonstrated villainy and blackguardy of the opposition. And the Nationalists, although they had been dealt a terrific and entirely unexpected blow, worked near miracles of politics with what they had. Morgan and his minions ranted and raved. They were being jobbed. They were being crucified by the moneyed powers. All those allegations and charges were sheerest fabrications, false, utterly vicious, containing nothing whatever of truth. They, not the patrol, were trying to force a showdown, to vindicate themselves and to confute those unspeakably unscrupulous lensmen before Election Day. And they were succeeding. Why otherwise had not a single one of the thousands of accused even been arrested? Ask that lying First Lensman, Virgil Samms. Ask that rock-hearted, iron-headed, conscienceless murderer, Roderick Kinnison. But do not, at peril of your sanity, submit your minds to their lenses. And why, the reader asks, were not at least some of those named persons arrested before Election Day? And your historian must answer frankly that he does not know. He is not a lawyer. It would be of interest, to some few of us, to follow in detail at least one of those days of legal battling in one of the high courts of the land, to quote verbatim at least a few of the many thousands of pages of transcript. But to most of us, the technicalities involved would be boring in the extreme. But couldn't the voters tell easily enough which side was on the offensive and which was on the defensive, which pressed for action and which insisted on postponement and delay? They could have, easily enough, if they had cared enough about the basic issues involved to make the necessary mental effort, but almost everyone was too busy doing something else. And it was so much easier to take somebody else's word for it. And finally, thinking is an exercise to which all too few brains are accustomed. But Morgan neither ranted nor raved nor blustered when he sat in conference with his faintly blue superior, who had come storming in as soon as he had learned of the crushing defeat of the Black Fleet. The Colonian was very highly concerned, so much so that the undertone of his peculiar complexion was turning slowly to a delicate shade of green. "How did that happen? How could it happen? Why was I not informed of the patrol's real power? How could you be guilty of such stupidity? Now I'll have to report to Scran of the Ike. He's pure, undiluted poison. And if word of this catastrophe ever gets up to Plur—" "Come down out of the stratosphere, Fernald," Morgan countered bitingly. "Don't try to make me the goat. I won't sit still for it. It happened because they could build a bigger fleet than we could. You were in on that, all of it. You knew what we were doing and approved of it, all of it. You were as badly fooled as I was. You were not informed because I could find out nothing. I could learn no more of their Bennett than they could of our Petrine. As to reporting, you will, of course, do as you please. But I would advise you not to cry too much before you're really hurt. This battle isn't over yet, my friend." The Colonian had been a badly shaken entity. It was a measure of his state of mind that he did not liquidate the temerarious Tellurian then and there. But since Morgan was as undisturbed as ever, and as sure of himself, he began to regain his wonted aplomb. His color became again its normal pale blue. "I will forgive your insubordination this time, since there were no witnesses, but use no more such language to me," he said stiffly. "I fail to perceive any basis for your optimism. The only chance now remaining is for you to win the election. And how can you do that? You must be, losing ground steadily and rapidly." "Not as much as you might think." Morgan pulled down a large, carefully drawn chart. This line represents the hidebound nationalists, whom nothing we can do will alienate from the party. This one the equally hidebound cosmocrats. The balance of power lies, as always, with the independents, these here. And many of them are not as independent as is supposed. We can buy or bring pressure to bear on half of them. That cuts them down to this size here. So, no matter what the patrol does, it can affect only this relatively small block here, and it is this block we are fighting for. We are losing a little ground, and steadily, yes, since we can't conceal from anybody with half a brain the fact that we're doing our best to keep the cases from ever coming to trial. But here's the actual observed line of sentiment, as determined from psychological indices up to yesterday. Here is the extrapolation of that line to Election Day. It forecasts us to get just under 49% of the total vote. "And is there anything cheerful about that?" Fernald asked frostily. "I'll say there is." Morgan's big face assumed a sneering smile, an expression never seen by any voter. "This chart deals only with living, legally registered, bona fide voters. Now, if we can come that close to winning an absolutely honest election, how do you figure we can possibly lose the kind this one is going to be? We're in power, you know. We've got this machine, and we know how to use it." "Oh, yes, I remember vaguely. You told me about North American politics once, a few years ago. Dead men, ringers, repeaters, ballot box stuffing, and so on, you said." "And so on is right, Chief," Morgan assured him heartily. "Everything goes this time. It'll be one of the biggest landslides in North American history." "I will, then, defer any action until after the election." "That will be the smart thing to do, Chief. Then you won't have to take any or make any report at all." And upon this highly satisfactory note the conference closed. And Morgan was actually as confident as he had appeared. His charts are actual and factual. He knew the power of money and the effectiveness of pressure. He knew the capabilities of the various units of his machine. He did not, however, know two things: Jill Samms' insidious, deeply hidden Voters' Protective League, and the bright flame of loyalty pervading the Galactic Patrol. Thus, between times of bellowing and screaming his carefully prepared rabble-rousing speeches, he watched calmly and contentedly the devious workings of his smooth and efficient organization. Until the day before election, that is. Then hordes of young men and young women went suddenly and briefly to work. At least 4 in every precinct of the entire nation. They visited, it seemed, every residence and every dwelling unit everywhere. They asked questions and took notes and vanished. And the machine's operatives, after the alarm was given, could not find man or girl or notebook. And the Galactic Patrol, which had never before paid any attention to elections, had given leave and ample time to its every North American citizen. Vessels of the North American contingent were grounded and practically emptied of personnel. Bases and stations were depopulated, and even from every distant world every patrolman registered in any North American precinct came to spend the day at home. Morgan began then to worry, but there was nothing he could do about the situation, or was there? If the civilian boys and girls were checking the registration books, and they were, it was as legally appointed checkers. If the uniformed boys and girls were all coming home to vote, and they were, that too was their inalienable right. But boys and girls were notoriously prone to accident and to debauchery. But again Morgan was surprised, and this time taken heavily aback. The web which had protected Grand Rally so efficiently, but greatly enlarged now, was functioning again, and Morgan and his minions spent a sleepless and thoroughly uncomfortable night. Election Day dawned clear, bright, and cool, auguring a record turnout. Voting was early and extraordinarily heavy. The polls were crowded. There was, however, very little disorder. Surprisingly little in view of the fact that the cosmocratic watchers, instead of being the venal whites of custom, were cold-eyed, unreachable men and women who seemed to know by sight every voter in the precinct. At least they spotted on sight and challenged without hesitation every ringer, every dead one, every repeater, and every impostor who claimed the right to vote. and those challenges, being borne out in every case by the carefully checked registration lists, were in every case upheld. Not that all of the policemen on duty, especially in the big cities, were above suspicion, of course, but whenever any one of those officers began to show a willingness to play ball with the machine, a calm, quiet-eyed patrolman would remark casually, "Better see that this election stays straight, Bud, and strictly according to the lists and signatures, or you're apt to find yourself listed in the big book along with the rest of the rats." It was not that the machine liked the way things were going, or that it did not have goon squads on the job. It was that there were, everywhere and always, more patrolmen than there were goons. And those patrolmen, however young in years some of them might have appeared to be, were space bronze veterans, space-hardened fighting men, armed with the last word in blasters, Lewiston Mark 17. To the boy's friends and neighbors, of course, his Lewiston was practically invisible. It was merely an article of clothing, the same as his pants. It carried no more of significance, of threat, or of menace than did the pistol and the club of the friendly Irish cop on the beat. But the goon did not see the patrolman as a friend. He saw the keen, clear, sharply discerning eyes, the long, strong fingers, the smoothly flowing muscles, so eloquent of speed and of power. He saw the Lewiston for what it was, the deadliest, most destructive hand weapon known to man. Above all, he saw the difference in numbers. 6 or 7 or 8 patrolmen to 4 or 5 or 6 of his own kind. If more hoods arrived, so did more spacemen. If some departed, so did a corresponding number of the wearers of the space black and silver. "Ain't you getting tired of sticking around here, George?" one mobster asked confidentially to one of the patrolmen. "I am. What say we and some of you fellows round up some girls and go have us a party?" George denied. His voice was gay and careless, but his eyes were icy cold. "My uncle's cousin's stepson is running for second assistant dog catcher, and I can't leave until I find out whether he wins or not." Thus nothing happened. Thus the invisible but nevertheless terrific tension did not erupt into open battle. And thus, for the first time in North America's long history, a presidential election was 99 1/99/100% pure. Evening came. The polls closed. The Cosmocrats' headquarters for the day, the grand ballroom of the Hotel Vandervoort, became the goal of every patrolman who thought he stood any chance at all of getting in. Kinnison had been there all day, of course. So had Joy, his wife, who, for lack of space, had been sadly neglected in these annals. Betty, their daughter, had come in early, accompanied by a husky and personable young lieutenant, who has no other place in this story. Jack Kinnison arrived with Dimples Maynard, dazzlingly blonde, wearing a screamingly red wisp of silk. She, too, had been shamefully slighted here, although she was never slighted anywhere else. "The first time I ever saw her," Jack was wont to say, "I went right into a flat spin, running around in circles and biting myself in the small of the back, and couldn't pull out of it for 4 hours." That Miss Maynard should be a very special item is not at all surprising, in view of the fact that she was to become the wife of one of the Kinnisons and the mother of another. The First Lensman, who had been in and out, came in to stay. So did Jill and her inseparable Mason Northrop. And so did others, singly or by 2s or 3s. Lensmen and their wives, Conway and Cleo Costigan, Dr. and Mrs. Rodebush, and Cleveland, Admiral and Mrs. Clayton, ditto Schweikert and Dr. Nels Bergenholm, and others. Nor were they all North Americans or even human. Rularion was there, and so was blocky, stocky Dronvire of Rigel 4. No outsider could tell ever what any lensman was thinking, to say nothing of such a monstrous lensman as Dronvire. But that hotel had been covered as no political headquarters had ever been covered before. The returns came in, seesawing maddeningly back and forth, faster and faster. The maritime provinces split 50-50. Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, Cosmocrat. New York, upstate, Cosmocrat. New York City, on the basis of incomplete but highly significant returns, was piling up a huge nationalist majority. Pennsylvania, Labor, Nationalist. Ohio, Farmers, Cosmocrat. 12 southern states went 6 and 6. Chicago, as usual, solidly for the machine. Likewise Quebec and Ottawa and Montreal and Toronto and Detroit and Kansas City and St. Louis and New Orleans and Denver. Then northern and western and far southern states came in, and evened the score. Saskatchewan, Alberta, Britcol, and Alaska all went Cosmocrat. So did Washington, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and most of the states of Mexico. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the Cosmocrats had a slight but definite lead, and were finally holding it. At 4 o'clock, the lead was larger, but California was still an unknown quantity. California could wreck everything. How would California go? Especially, how would California's 2 metropolitan districts, the 2 most independent and free-thinking and least predictable big cities of the nation, how would they go? At 5 o'clock, California seemed safe. Except for Los Angeles and San Francisco, the Cosmocrats had swept the state, and in those 2 great cities they held a commanding lead. It was still mathematically possible, however, for the Nationalists to win. "It's in the bag! Let's start the celebration!" someone shouted, and others took up the cry. "Stop it! No!" Kinnison's parade ground voice cut through the noise. "No celebration is in order or will be held until the results become certain or Witherspoon concedes." The 2 events came practically together. Witherspoon conceded a couple of minutes before it became mathematically impossible for him to win. Then came the celebration, which went on and on interminably. At the first opportunity, however, Kinnison took Samms by the arm, led him without a word into a small office, and shut the door. Samms, also saying nothing, sat down in the swivel chair, put both feet up on the desk, lit a cigarette, and inhaled deeply. "Well, Virg, satisfied?" Kinnison broke the silence at last. His lens was off. "We're on our way." "Yes, Rod, fully, at last." No more than his friend did he dare to use his lens, to plumb the depths he knew so well were there. Now it will roll, under its own power. No one man now is, or ever will be, indispensable to the Galactic Patrol. Nothing can stop it now. Epilogue. The murder of Senator Morgan in his own private office was never solved. If it had occurred before the election, suspicion would certainly have fallen upon Roderick Kinnison, but as it was, it did not. By no stretch of the imagination could anyone conceive of Rod the Rock kicking a man after he had knocked him down. Not that Morgan did not have powerful and vindictive enemies in the underworld. He had so many that it proved impossible to fasten the crime to any one of them. Officially, Kinnison was on a 5-year leave of absence from the Galactic Patrol. The office of Port Admiral had been detached entirely from the fleet and assigned to the office of the President of North America. Actually, however, in every respect that counted, Roderick Kinnison was still Port Admiral, and would remain so until he died or until the Council retired him by force. Officially, Kinnison was taking a short, well-earned vacation from the job in which he had been so outstandingly successful. Actually, he was doing a quick flit to Patrine, to get personally acquainted with the new lensmen and to see what kind of a job they were doing. Besides, Virgil Samms was already there. He arrived, he got acquainted, he saw, he approved. "How about coming back to Tullus with me, Virg?" he asked when the visiting was done. "I've got to make a speech, and it'd be nice to have you hold my head." "I'd be glad to," and the Chicago took off. Half of North America was dark when they neared Tullus. All of it, apparently, was obscured by clouds. Only the navigating officers of the vessel knew where they were, nor did either of the 2 lensmen care. They were having too much fun arguing about the talents and abilities of their respective grandsons. The Chicago landed. A bug was waiting. The 2 lensmen, without an order being given, were whisked away. Samms had not asked where the speech was to be given, and Kinnison simply did not realize that he had not told him all about it. Thus Samms had no idea that he was just leaving Spokane Spaceport, Washington. After a few miles of fast, open-country driving, the bug reached the city. It slowed down, swung into brightly lighted Maple Street, and passed a sign reading Cannon Hill something or other, neither of which names meant anything to either lensman. Kinnison looked at his friend's red-thatched head and glanced at his watch. "Looking at you reminds me, I need a haircut," he remarked. Should have got one aboard, but didn't think of it. Joy told me if I come home without it, she'll braid it in pigtails and tie it up with pink ribbons, and you're shaggier than I am. You've got to get one, or else buy yourself a violin. Let's say we do it now." "Have we got time enough?" "Plenty." Then to the driver, "Stop at the first barber shop you see, please." "Yes, sir. There's a good one a few blocks further along." The bug sped down Maple Street, turned sharply into plainly marked 12th Avenue. Neither lensman saw the sign. "Here you are, sir." "Thanks." There were 2 barbers and 2 chairs, both empty. The lensman, noticing that the place was neatly kept and meticulously clean, sat down and resumed their discussion of 2 extremely unusual infants. The barbers went busily to work. "Just as well, though, better really, that the kids didn't marry each other at that," Kinnison concluded finally. "The way it is, we've each got a grandson. It'd be tough to have to share one with you." Samms made no reply to this sally, for something was happening. The fact that this fair-skinned, yellow-haired, blue-eyed barber was left-handed had not rung any bells. There were lots of left-handed barbers. He had neither seen nor heard the cat, a less-than-half-grown, gray, tiger-striped kitten, which, after standing up on its hind legs to sniff ecstatically at his nylon-clad ankles, had uttered a couple of almost inaudible meows and had begun to purr happily. Crouching, tensing its strong little legs, it leapt almost vertically upward. Its tail struck the barber's elbow. Hastily brushing the kitten aside, and beginning profuse apologies both for his awkwardness and for the presence of the cat, he had never done such a thing before, and he would drown him forthwith. The barber applied a styptic pencil, and recollection hit Samms a pile-driver blow. "Well, I'm a—" He voiced 3 highly un-Samms-like, highly specific expletives, which, as Mentor had foretold so long before, were both self-derogatory and profane. Then, as full realization dawned, he bit a word squarely in 2. "Excuse me, please, Mr. Carbonaro, for this outrageous display. It was not the scratch, nor was any of it your fault. Nothing you could have done would have—" "You know my name?" the astonished barber interrupted. "Yes, you were, recommended to me by a friend." Whatever Samms could say would make things worse. The truth, wild as it was, would have to be told, at least in part. "You do not look like an Italian, but perhaps you have enough of that racial heritage to believe in prophecy?" "Of course, sir. There have always been prophets, true prophets." "Good. This event was foretold in detail, in such complete detail that I was deeply, terribly shocked. Even to the kitten. You call it Thomas?" "Yes, sir. Thomas Aquinas." "It is actually a female." "In here, Thomasina." The kitten had been climbing enthusiastically up his leg. Now, as he held a pocket invitingly open, she sprang into it, settled down, and began to purr blissfully. While the barbers and Kinnison stared, pop-eyed, Samms went on. "She is determined to adopt me, and it would be a shame not to requite such affection. Would you part with her for, say, 10 credits?" "10 credits? I'll be glad to give her to you for nothing." "10 it is, then. One more thing. Rod, you always carry a pocket rule. Measure this scratch, will you? You'll find it's mighty close to 3 millimeters long." "Not close, Virg. It's exactly 3 millimeters, as near as this vernier can scale it." "And just above and parallel to the cheekbone." "Check. Just above and as parallel as though it had been ruled there by a draftsman." "Well, that's that. Let's get finished with the haircuts before you're late for your speech." And the barbers, with thoughts which will be left to the imagination, resumed their interrupted tasks. "Spill it, Virg." Kinnison lensed the pent-up thought. If Carbonaro, who did not know Samms at all, had been amazed at what had been happening, Kinnison, who had known him so long and so well, had been literally and completely dumbfounded. "What in hell's behind this? What's the story? Give!" Samms told him, and a mental silence fell, a silence too deep for intelligible thought. Each was beginning to realize that he never would and never could know what Mentor of Arisia really was.